Going live momentarily through the magic of Hollywood. And there's a 20-second delay, so.
Yeah, I've got a live on YouTube indicator here in the corner of my screen.
Yeah, all right, we're on. Good to go. I will get this posted, which I just did.
Will it be recording at the same time?
It is, yes.
Cool.
So we are officially live. All right, we'll give people a chance. Hi, Patty. Patty's on. Let me get this over here. Chat. I'll put the chat over me so I can't see me. Patty's there. All right, we got 4 people watching. So if you're there, say hi. If you're a subscriber, I'm happy to see Patty's on here. Patty, I don't think Patty was part of our workshop that we did in Plymouth, so I don't think you met Patty, but Patty's a Plymouth client.
All right, hi Patty.
Who else is on? Anybody else? There's like I said, there's a 20-second delay between like what we say and what people see, so that's like the only bad thing. Sawyer's here. Oh, good. Hi, Sawyer. Sawyer, I got us up and running. I'm very happy about that. I feel like Sawyer was here just to make sure that we were here. Like I think that's more. I think that's more what it was.
People just aren't looking at a blank screen.
No. So we'll wait till we get a couple more people on and give people a couple minutes. We've typically gotten somewhere around like 10 to 15 people on these, but as I said, it gets housed on YouTube afterwards in our after hours channel. So hopefully was oh, that's right. Yeah, Patty wasn't able, but yeah, next time for sure. We will be running it again, Patty. That's for sure on the workshop.
Yeah.
Hopefully Brooke had a chance to get on. I sent her the link. So I don't know if she's busy doing things this afternoon or not.
Yeah, she's probably, well, I don't know.
Hi, Barb. Happy to see you on here. Long time no see. I hope you and your husband are doing well. We miss you guys. Barb's an Ann Arbor client. Both her and her husband are Ann Arbor clients. So that's good. I don't think Barb's joined us for any of these discussions yet. So happy to see we're getting some new faces on here.
Yeah, the more the merrier.
Absolutely. All right, here we go. We're ticking up there. We got 10 right now, so that's good. And remember everyone that's watching this, this gets archived on our YouTube channel on After Hours. So if some of your friends are interested in this and they don't have the opportunity to listen to John live right now, they'll be able to just go on YouTube and we'll make sure that people know how to get directed to it. All right, we're getting, we had 11, it went down to 10. Somebody hopped on, they must have saw me and was like, dude, I thought it wasn't that guy that was talking. So, all right, well, we'll hit the magic number of 11. So we'll get started. So I want to thank everyone for joining us. I'm excited to be hosting one of these for the first time. Normally I'm in the seat that John's in, where I'm doing most of the talking, but now I get to be the interested observer and the person that's asking the questions. Before we actually launch into this and I give John a chance to introduce himself, I'll just give you a little context for how John and I know each other. As John will tell you, he's a performance psychologist and I am actually one of John's clients. I've dealt with some anxiety issues throughout the course of my life. Certainly running any sort of a business, particularly nowadays, can be a very anxiety provoking type of thing. And I can tell you personally firsthand, some of the strategies that we're going to talk about today have been enormously beneficial to me. And they're actually still strategies that I work on and I employ like literally up to this minute. And, John and I were talking last week in one of our sessions, and I think I told him that I felt like everything up till this period of time when the whole coronavirus thing kicked in was like the preseason. And this is like the playoffs. Like the playoffs is now here for me with all the work that I've done in this area that we're going to talk about today. So I hope a lot of what John talks about is going to be as beneficial for all of you as it's been for me. With that said, I don't want to take a lot more time away from letting John talk. So I guess, for starters, John, just to give everyone a little bit of context, why don't you let us know what your background is like and kind of how that's going to inform the things we're going to talk about today?
Yeah, well, I mean, my educational background's in psychology. I do have a counseling psychology degree from Western Michigan, but really spent my prime academic career in University of North Carolina in Greensboro with a degree, a doctorate in sport and performance psychology. So I really wanted to work more from a strength perspective. How can we make you just a better version of yourself, not necessarily fix, cure, change? And so that kind of philosophy really worked better with my own values and perspective. So from there, I spent about 7 years working with special operations for the Army at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, training mental skills to perform at a higher level. So all variety of skills in order to perform better at whatever their job is. So now I've been working with athletes all across Michigan, business owners, general population on life skills and just wellness skills, motivation, confidence skills, all through the lens of this kind of foundation that Mike is familiar with, which is acceptance and commitment therapy and strategies. So that's in a nutshell kind of what I've been doing for this small mental health practice, Blend Health.
Awesome. Yeah, and you said something in there that was interesting, which is operating from a strength-based perspective. And I feel like our medical system, have it be our physical health system or our mental health system, seems to not operate from the strength-based perspective. It's more like the let's fix what's wrong with you rather than let's recognize what's right with you. So maybe you could contrast, before we get into this, kind of some of the traditional approaches to dealing with mental health issues, and then that could possibly build a bridge into talking about ACT and how that could be beneficial for people nowadays.
Yeah, and I think it starts with this, like you said, this idea of a medical model to mental health, which is curative or fixing a problem or putting a Band-Aid on it. And I think that that's where a lot of traditional mental health is right now in general. I mean, the giant monster in mental health is CBT, right? Cognitive behavioral therapy, which focuses on identifying irrational beliefs and thoughts, identifying negative emotions and negative self-talk, changing those emotions to positive emotions, changing self-talk to positive. And the view or the message that it sends is, if you're not happy or feeling good, you're not normal. If you're having negative thoughts, there's something wrong with you. If you're feeling depressed, there's something wrong with you or something that needs to be fixed. And so I think that's where I really took a hard U-turn on all of that, especially for athletes, but for anyone. Like, we're working on just building on who you are and what you have available to you, and making sure that you're using the skills that you have and the strengths that you have and the weaknesses that you have to just live a more enriched, fulfilling life. So the approach that I come from really is more driven by not changing you really, or your emotions, your thoughts. It's more about accepting those thoughts and emotions and changing your relationship with them so that you have the ability to behave in a more value-driven way.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's so important, especially right now when people are feeling anxiety. And I feel like if you aren't noticing that you're feeling some degree of anxiety right now around all this uncertainty, you're probably completely disconnected from your feelings and your emotions and your thoughts, because this is a very anxiety provoking time. And I think, to your point, sitting there and saying, you don't need to be anxious. You don't need to be anxious. Everything's going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. That narrative in your head makes the situation much worse, not much better, very, very quickly.
Yeah, and I think the analogy that makes sense to me, and I think has made sense for a lot of my clients, is if you're in a rowboat and you've got your oars and a storm comes up, CBT is going to teach you skills to use all your energy and all your strength to row out of the storm. And you're huffing and puffing, and every negative thought, you're countering it, and you're trying to talk positively yourself and building self-esteem, and you're putting in all this work. And yeah, maybe you get out of the storm, but guess what? You're exhausted, you're fatigued, you have little energy left for what really matters in your life. You've just been battling your thoughts and emotions, And guess what? Also, another storm is going to come up. So instead, what ACT works on and what I work with my clients on is, look, you're in the rowboat. You've still got some oars. A storm comes up and you can maneuver around a little bit, but you're really going to learn to just balance in the storm and say, all right, I'm going to get rained on. It's going to suck for a while, but I don't have to let it weigh me down, and I don't have to struggle with it, and I don't have to suffer from it. I can just know that the storm eventually will pass, and I can put my energy into what I want to be doing and the way I want to be living my life, even if I'm getting rained on a little bit.
Yeah, and that's great. And I want to dive into ACT a little bit here, but two more things I kind of want to follow up on. First thing is this approach that you're talking about that's different than CBT seems very counterculture or counterintuitive. Like, I feel like from a young age, we're taught, like, don't worry, be happy and think positive thoughts. And the way you think dictates the way you act and all these things. So how do you feel that kind of, connects with the notion of CBT, and then where the disconnect exists?
Oh yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. Our society is like, look, man, don't be, look, how many times have you said to yourself, had a coach say to you, a parent say, look, there's no reason to be anxious. Stop being nervous. Like, don't be mad. Stop being mad. That's wrong. Like, be happy. You got to put a smile on, and think happy thoughts. Well, unfortunately, our mind is not a happy place a lot of times. Like, everybody knows the phrase, the mind is a terrible thing to waste. I just tell my clients that the mind is a terrible thing. And it dredges up memories from the past. It imagines horrible futures. And if we are constantly battling with that and trying to, like, overlay some positive thinking and positive emotions with that, it either comes across as very ingenuine, or it doesn't last very long, and it just doesn't work in the long run. So yeah, our society is constantly bombarding with be happy. You have to be happy. And I think what resonated with me was a podcast done by one of the big names in ACT, Russ Harris. And he said, look, happiness, if you looked it up in a dictionary in like 1950, was feeling fulfilled, doing something that gave you a sense of accomplishment, even if it was difficult, not fun, hard, challenging. Like, that was happiness, feeling fulfilled. Now it's like happiness has to be feeling good all the time. Yeah. So I have to be feeling good to feel happy. So honestly, I think it's like, and this is a military term, it's like it's a self-licking ice cream cone, in the sense that, like, I'm trying to be happy all the time, and I'm comparing myself to all these people via social media that are happier than me. And so now I'm trying really harder and harder to be happy, but I'm still dealing with all the anxiety and depressive and sad thoughts in my head. So what's wrong with me? I must be broken.
Yeah, right.
When in fact, the fact of the matter is that the whole range of human emotion is normal. You want to be able to experience the whole range of human emotion, just without it ruining your day, week, month, year, life.
Yeah, exactly. And the science nerd in me wants to point out that our brain on an evolutionary level was designed for one thing, to keep us alive. And that meant looking out for danger. And so that's why when you say the mind is a terrible thing, the mind does some amazing things. And one of the most amazing things it does is it keeps us alive. But the problem is we haven't downloaded the new operating system yet. We're still working off the operating system 1.0 from 5,000 years ago. Yep. Now we don't have saber-toothed tigers and famine that's going to kill us off. So that's where the mind kind of gets shifted into a terrible thing in our modern world.
Yeah, I mean, and again, this is from the years I lived in the South, but, like, bless its heart, right? The mind, like, it's doing what it thinks is the right thing for us, which is to basically scare us into not getting up on stage and talking in front of people, not trying out for the soccer team, not going out and trying out for the local theater, because God forbid we should fail or have our ego damaged or get criticized in some way. And the mind doesn't want that for us. It just wants us to be safe and protected and alive.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm glad you kind of brought up some of those different things. You talked about, going out for the theater, the team, or whatever it might be. So the last thing I wanted to touch on before we dive into ACT specifically is you're a performance psychologist. And I think that that word sometimes connotes to people like athletes and sport and military, which it certainly does. But I think it's important before we launch into this that we frame up the performance context for people, because I know personally, you've helped me tremendously in my performances during my life, but none of those have been sport performance based. So maybe you can help expand people's awareness of what the term performance means.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. So I mean, I feel like I do a really good job no matter what client I'm working with in framing out anything can be a performance. I work with some people dealing with addiction, staying sober and drug free as a performance. Getting up in the morning and for some people and making their bed and brushing their teeth and putting clothes on as a performance.
Right.
Exercising and adhering to an exercise program is a performance. So performance is the development and improvement of any task and the ability to then use that task effectively when it matters and use that skill effectively. So a performance is anything from, checking and writing emails to being in a conversation. Having a relationship and a conversation with somebody is a performance. Are you able to be an active listener, stay present, respond both verbally and non-verbally to the person you're talking to? So communication and is a performance. Anything academic. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's anything.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's great. So I think, for many people that are going to be watching this, yes, some of them might be athletes and they use this in the sport performance context, but for many of us nowadays, performances is just, living our lives in the most fulfilling, value driven way, despite all the craziness that's around us, being that strong person for your family that still can provide, that still can help out, that still can give comfort. So I think we have to shift kind of our perspective on the word performance. And I know I have, and I think it's made a profound difference. So.
Yeah. And I don't know if this segues into ACT a little bit, but one of the central idea behind ACT is improving and harnessing psychological flexibility. And basically psychological flexibility is just the ability to be open to experience, stay in the present, and do what matters, meaning live your life according to your values. And so if you think about what what behavior is, yes, it is overt behavior like going to the gym, being able to teach a class, taking a test, playing sports, whatever. But it's also covert behavior. So the behavior of how am I managing my thoughts and emotions? Where am I directing my attention? And am I able to stay focused on a task and manage my thoughts in addition to staying focused and present on the task? So, psychological flexibility is both overt behavior change and covert or internal kind of psychological behavior change.
Yeah, that's great. And so I think that is a great segue. How would you define ACT? I mean, I know you sort of used the word psychological flexibility, but like maybe unpack that a little bit more and kind of let people know at least the basic framework, and then we can maybe dive in a little bit deeper to give people some actionables.
Yeah, so ACT is a model of therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, originated by Stephen Hayes, and essentially what it's about is, to me, it is very much an answer to CBT, right? Because in ACT is at its core is not a change therapy for thoughts and emotions. It is absolutely a change therapy for behavior, both internal and external. So ACT is about psychological flexibility and harnessing these 6 different components of ACT to build skills to live life more fully by our values. And the way we do that is by 3 general components. One is be open. And within the be open skills for ACT, there's diffusion, which means our ability to separate from our thinking, right? I'm a terrible human. That's a thought I could have. If my behavior is fused with that thought, then my behavior is going to follow that thought of I'm a terrible person, right? Or a terrible athlete, or a terrible leader, or a terrible husband. But if I'm able to defuse and separate from that thought, I no longer have to live by and believe and act in accordance with that thought. I can just see it as a thought. So I'm open to my thinking, knowing that those thoughts can come and go without me being attached or hooked to them. Right? Acceptance is the other open, and that's an openness to emotion. Can I allow emotions to be there? Because the last time I checked and really gave it an effort, where somebody cut me off in traffic, or, you know, something made me mad, I couldn't just tell myself, stop being mad. So that leaves you, when you want something changed, you've got a couple of options, right? You can either just wallow in misery that it's there, you can change it, or you can truly accept that it's there and move on and put your focus on something important. So that's acceptance and diffusion are the two kind of be open skills for ACT.
So John, I want to follow up on that really quick, because I think some people, well, many people realize that they have a thought that they maybe start to fuse with, or they have an emotion that they really start to get entangled with. And I think many people try to do one of two things. If it's a thought, they try to just like argue with that thought and refute it. If it's an emotion, they just try to push it away as much as they can, which seems at odds with what ACT would suggest. What is the negative implications of doing kind of the very traditional normative, either refute it or like just push it away as fast as we can?
Yeah. So in terms of the thought, I think one of the great analogies is, look, we always have a radio playing in the background in our heads. And like we talked about the brain, a lot of time it's like the radio doom and gloom show.
Yep.
So positive thinking, or CBT, would tell you, well, let's just air another radio station, radio happy and cheerful, on top of this other radio station in hopes that it drowns it out. Unfortunately, what usually happens with that is it doesn't stick because we don't believe it. And then it ends up just being too much going on in our head, and we're not focused on what we're meant to be focused on. So, you know, with diffusion, I think the essence is that we can frame or reframe that thinking. So I absolutely, ACT and diffusion really focuses on the role of language. So kind of a combination of diffusion and acceptance in that sense is, like, I always talk to clients, and I myself also try not to use the term or the phrase, I am angry, I am frustrated, I am anxious. And here's why. I am John. Like, I guess theoretically I could change that if I wanted to and change my name, but I think I would still be John. So if I say I am angry, like I'm saying that it is enveloping my entire self. If I say I am noticing a feeling of anger, I'm having an emotion of frustration, I can have it the same way I have this pen, right? I can put it down. The pen doesn't cease to exist. It's still there, but I don't have to tangle up with it. So I think there's a strategy to disconnect and move ourselves away from thoughts by saying, look, okay, I just thought I sucked. No, in reality, I've just had a thought that I sucked. And to your point on believing it, like I ask clients all the time, like, what percentage of what your brain tells you is true or accurate, or better yet, helpful? And usually that's a pretty low number. So the question then is, why do we buy about 100% of it wholesale and act and behave in ways that align with that thinking? So instead, if you can just diffuse and recognize that thoughts are simply bits of language that come in and out of your head, largely without your permission, then it can be much easier to separate from that thought and then make a choice that is value driven, that is more helpful, and not have to be so clung to that thought.
Yeah, I think the radio analogy is great. It's like you have the one radio that's already on, and just like any radio playing in the background, it eventually you don't listen to it anymore. It just sort of sits back there. But then you take the other radio and you turn that on to try to blare out the other one. The next thing you know, you just got all kinds of sound in your head and you can't think. So I think that's an amazing analogy.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting, one of the closest groups I worked with within Special Forces was their medics, and they are trained at a extremely high level of trauma medicine. And what they would say is, when they would approach a patient was, and we would ask them kind of what their process is, they would be saying in their head, like, I got this, you know what to do, you've been trained heavily, you're really good at this. You're the best SF medic around. You're really intelligent. And what we ended up saying to them is like, who are you treating? Are you treating yourself right now, or are you treating your patient?
Yeah.
Because your patient is bleeding or wounded in the external world, and here you are with your attention inside trying to treat yourself and convince yourself that you're a good medic. Yeah. So attention has to be kind of external on the task in the present moment. And one of the ways to do that is to kind of separate from those thoughts, allow emotions to be there, just be open to the experiences that come with life, right? Get comfortable being uncomfortable. Like the only way to get comfortable with things is to start out with a comfort zone like this, and then to just push yourself out day after day until other things fall within the comfort zone. So that to me just makes a lot of sense with being open to experiences and not trying to avoid thinking or emotions.
Yeah, that's great. And so I think it's good just for everyone to point out to everyone that, what you essentially said was, part of this is just accepting that your mind's going to generate thoughts, your mind and your body's going to generate emotions. That's irrespective of you, like the real you that kind of sits behind your own eyes. And you can't control the generation of those thoughts or emotions. They're just going to happen, but you can control your perspective on them. And that part of that is diffusion and acceptance, but I also feel like that also sort of gets into some of the other components of ACT.
Yep, exactly. And that's why all these components are just it's funny, you learn them fairly siloed and compartmentalized, but they're only like the most effective when they're all kind of used together.
Awesome.
And so to your point, what you're talking about is the one thing that we can control with work is our attention. Where is our attention? And so the other half, or the other third, one of the other thirds of the psychological flexibility model is being present. And so the central kind of one of the two is, well, I'll hit one of the two is called self as context, which essentially means we have a thinking self and we have an observing self. Now, one of those has been developing really well since birth. The thinking self has been doing a really great job of questioning things and being curious and problem solving and all the, the other things, all the stuff that we talked about in thinking fast and thinking fast and slow, system 1, system 2 thinking. Like we need to do that. Like thinking is great. But there are times like the observing self and the ability to just stand back and step back from your thoughts and emotions and observe what's happening is, I think, a very underdeveloped and underappreciated skill because it uses less of our very limited attentional capacity to just observe something. I can observe a dirty dish sitting on my kitchen counter without thinking, oh man, I better wash that dish. If I don't wash it, my wife's going to be angry. Oh, we need that dish for tomorrow for dinner. There are times when I need to just be able to observe things. And self as context is about slowly stepping back so that you can observe what's going on with your thoughts and emotions without being like entangled and wrestling and in the ring with them. So that's more of a stance and more of a developmental process. Whereas the other side of being present is connection with the present moment. And most of that is done through mindfulness skills. And that is a definite toolbox every day working on mindfulness. And I know everyone has probably heard the term mindfulness. It's very popular these days. But if you've heard it described any way that's not kind of like this, then it's probably been aggrandized or kind of changed in some way. But mindfulness is your ability or a set of skills that keeps your attention in the present moment. When that attention drifts or wanders, you gently notice it. And when I say gently, that's where self-acceptance and self-compassion come in. In a very non-judgmental way, you say, okay, my attention has wandered, and you bring it back. And so you practice that for short periods of time every day. Breath is usually the main one, but you can take mindful walks and just notice things in your 5 senses. Notice what your brain is giving you without going down the road of thinking about it. And so that ability, that set of skills, those mindfulness skills are essential to keeping attention in the present moment.
Yeah, that's great. It's the self as context. I mean, you've worked with me on ACT. I've studied, ACT, and that is a little bit ambiguous. So like I'm not a super fan of the word self as context because that sort of confuses me.
Yeah.
I like the observing self. So
Yeah.
for anyone that's listening to this and like, oh, what is the self as context? The observing self is essentially, what they're getting at here. But the present moment awareness, I think that is something that just in general in our society, we tend to struggle with. We tend to be thinking about the thing we got to do next, the thing that we just got done doing, all the things that aren't here and now. And, I know it's kind of cliche to say that, if you're not here and now, your life is just passing you by because life occurs in the here and now. But it is incredibly true how that helps to, not only facilitate performance, but also reduce anxiety, worry, sadness, and rumination because you're just here.
Yeah, and I think one of the central tenets of ACT is like, it is by no means the goal of ACT to reduce anxiety. The goal of ACT is to change your focus and attention to pay attention to what matters in your life, which as a happy byproduct reduces anxiety. Because if anxiety lives, as you're alluding to, lives in the past or future, right? It is all about imagining futures or being anxious about the presentation you just gave or the soccer game you just had or the workout you didn't do. And so the ability to suck yourself out of the past and the future and stop doing what I call past and future tripping and stay presently focused helps you keep that focus on what your values are and what behavior you can do right now to move yourself in that direction. So, that is for sure essential skill to this whole ACT components and skills and concepts is the ability to maintain a present focus in the external environment a lot of times, right? Because that's where our performances are happening, whether it's doing a workout or writing an email or getting in a conversation. If we're not presently focused, think about driving. How many times have you gone 5, 10, 20 miles without having a clue what you passed, the billboards, the mile markers, anything? And that is just you dividing your attention and being sucked probably internal and not giving your attention to the task of driving.
Yeah. We don't have time for it, but there's a funny story about Kemper, who's our Ann Arbor general manager, driving 2 hours south away from Michigan because he put in his GPS his street address, except he put in Virginia instead of Michigan, and he drove 2 hours south without even realizing it. So there's an example of not being too mindful, and also a very funny story. But, I think it's interesting, an analogy that popped into my mind, and I think we talked about this at one point, and it's from the Kristin Neff book on self-compassion.
Uh-huh.
What's the title of that book? It escapes me.
I
can't remember it either. But
I can't remember either.
Kristin Neff is the author.
Yeah.
It's a book on self-compassion. It's a very good book. And she talks about the sky as being like the observing self. Like the blue sky is like your observing self. Nothing changes or hurts the sky, right? Like clouds come through, storms come through, birds fly around. The observing self is just the sky watching everything happen. And then Neff talks about in that book, a robin flying all over the place, doing all kinds of crazy things, and the sky just kind of watching that robin and letting it float away. And when I read that analogy for the first time, I thought, man, I've been doing this all wrong. Like I was the sky and I saw that robin and I didn't like it. And I grabbed the robin and I tried to throw it away as fast as I could because that's what we're taught. Like, oh, there's a negative thought. It's bad. I want that the heck out of here. I threw it away. And then guess what? That robin turned around and came screaming right back at me. So I think that was when it really hit me what it meant to be an observer of one's thoughts and emotions. And as you said, how to just gently bring your attention back to what you're doing, let the robin go and then, here's John, let's refocus. So I think that was an interesting analogy.
Yeah. And, self-acceptance, self-compassion is a big part of the ACT process. I mean, there's a great book and I know you've read it, The Confidence Gap by Russ Harris. And it just has a great section on, you know, the toxicity and the unhelpfulness of blanket self-judgments. Like there's a big difference between saying I screwed up today and I am a screw up. And so I screwed up today can be potentially very self-reflective, can lead down a very instructive, critical but improvement-esque road. Whereas I am a screw up is much more likely to stick and just sit there heavily and weigh on your emotions and your thoughts and start to ruminate. So blanket self-judgments are definitely something that you should look out for in terms of your ability to just to be self-accepting and self-compassionate.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
so
go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so this is acceptance and commitment therapy, or acceptance and commitment training. So we've talked about kind of the accepting component. We're going to circle back around to these with some actionables before we're done for everyone. But we've talked about the acceptance component. You know, now we need to kind of talk about the committed action component. Yeah. And I want to kind of frame this in the context of this, because I think it'll tee you up nicely to talk about how the committed action component works in the ACT framework. People are very concerned with goals and achievement. And I feel like right now, everyone's life goals have been put on pause. Like right now, my life goal is like, can I go to the grocery store and wear a mask on my face so I don't get sick or I don't get anyone else sick? So it's like all my business goals fell by the wayside. And, you know, it's hard to act with commitment in a time like this when the goals that you normally have are so far away from anything you could actually feasibly achieve, just because our life circumstances have changed so much. So let's maybe talk a little bit about how committed action works with ACT, and then maybe even put that in the context of how our goal-driven society is kind of ground to a halt right now and what we can do about it.
Yeah, so we've talked about be open, we've talked about be present, and then the last component is do what matters. And before we can do what matters, we need to know what matters. And so that's where values becomes a huge piece of this. And definitely we could go down the rabbit hole on the connections, the differences, the similarities between goals and values. But let's just say this: goals are inherently in the future. And some component of them is now we are finding out really well that they're not within our control, right? I signed up for a triathlon and I had a whole training plan ready to go. So now that triathlon is off the table, do I have to stop that training plan? Can I no longer work out? Is it no longer worth my time because I can't do the triathlon in June? Well, no, because I can lean on what matters more than my goals, which is my values. My values are happening in the present and they're in my control. Every day, every second of every day, I can do something that moves me in the direction of my values. I can never accomplish my values. It's not an end point. It's a process and a continual living and behaving and making choices that move us in that direction. And I think the analogy that works really well is kind of a geography analogy. It's like, look, if my goal is San Francisco, I certainly am not going to be able to get there today, especially if I'm walking, especially with what's going on with the virus and everything. So, but that doesn't mean I can't get up and walk a mile to the west, or even 10 steps, or even one step. So my values are more like my cardinal directions. They should definitely be connected to my goals in the sense that I need to be value driven in what the goals that I want to accomplish, but I can always move myself in a value direction, despite my goals being accessible or inaccessible or 10 years in the future or 2 weeks in the future. So values is going to be an essential component to when you think about and you observe, and the observing self thinks about those thoughts. I don't even care. We care very little actually about whether a thought is true or false. Because let's say that I am a screw up and I have a thought that I'm a screw up. If I wrestle with that thought as being true or false, I may come up with the solution that I'm not a screw up. But at the end of the day, what have I been doing with my time and my energy and my attention during that kind of internal wrestle? What I care about is that a helpful thought or an unhelpful thought to move me toward my values? And if it's an unhelpful thought, then I need to defuse from it and figure out what's my value, what value can I count on to help me move in that direction. So understanding your values is the first step, but you also have to commit to basically coming up with a library of behaviors and choices that align you and move you in that value direction. And then you come to the committed action. And that could be anything from, that could be goal setting, right? Goal setting, problem solving, skills training, covert psychological behavior, mental skills training. Every single client I have, athlete or otherwise, or, addiction, they have a daily, weekly mental training routine that they go through, that they're committed action to bringing their attention to the present moment, controlling their attention and bringing it from internal to external, aligning their behavior with their values, defusing from thoughts, accepting emotions. I mean, all of those are components of the committed action, as long as you're talking about skill-driven things that you're working on tangibly to move yourself in a value direction.
Yeah, that's great. One thing you brought up, and I want to go back to it for a second because I think it's such a critical component of this, and it really, in my mind, kind of it joins everything together, is you brought up the concept of a thought being helpful or not helpful. And, the idea of thoughts being true or not doesn't matter. I mean, I often say that we tell ourselves stories all the time, and they're stories that don't have a real truth to them. And it's more a question of, is it helpful in your life, which I think is the concept that I've heard termed workability. And I really like that term. And so maybe just go back to that for a second, just to highlight that for people, the importance of the concept of workability.
Yeah, and so workability is the central question that you ask yourself on any emotion, thought, behavior, experience. Is at that choice point, is the thought or emotion I'm experiencing, is it workable for what I want to achieve today, to live a valued life, to feel more fulfilled? And if that's why we don't use the terms positive and negative. Like if John telling himself, get your butt out of bed and get down and do your workout, is that a negative thought? What possibly, but it's very workable and helpful to motivate me to go do what I need to do today. Similarly, like, I don't want to give traditionally negative thoughts a bad rap either. What if I have these like very blanket positive self-affirmations that I always believe? Like, if I always believe I am the best father in the world, how am I going to accept feedback from a friend or my wife or my mother-in-law on like some way I could interact differently with my son? Like, I'm going to take that pretty poorly. I'm also not going to put a whole lot of effort into improving as a dad because I already have the self-affirmation that I'm the best dad in the world. So that's why positive and negative that is not a workable thought for me moving myself toward the value of connection and family with my son and my wife, to say, oh, I'm the best husband, I'm the best dad, because then I'm not going to put a whole lot of effort into improving. So positive, negative, irrelevant. Is it contextually functional, right? The underlying philosophy of ACT, contextual functionalism. In this context, what is the function of this thought or emotion, and is it workable?
Yeah, love it. I love it. I mean, that's something that really resonated with me because it's such a good litmus test, because you could debate all day long in your mind if a thought is helpful or not helpful, bad or good. But the question is it workable, like in this moment? And it's amazing how quickly that gets you out of your head and back into the present moment. And that's where all these things start to kind of weave together. So I want to, can you kind of review here? We talked about basically the 6 principles. So we talked about, being open is, diffusion and acceptance. We talked about, kind of the present moment's awareness, the mindfulness skills of the observing self, and then being present and connecting your attention in the present moment. And then we talked about the do what matters, which is based on values and committed action. So we've got those 6 elements of ACT. And we've got about 15 minutes or so left. So I'm curious as to how you might frame up utilizing these skills and these tools right now for people in the context of this challenging circumstance that we're under. What would be some of your action steps that you would suggest people take away from this?
Yeah, I think traditionally, obviously that would be person to person. If someone is lacking motivation and direction, we're probably going to start with values. If they're stuck in their head and they can't stop the negative thoughts, and then we'd start with diffusion. Today, in what we have going on, kind of the universality of the anxiety and the uncertainty and the fear that we have about the future and what's going to happen and how serious it is and when we'll go back to work, and whether that fear is social or occupational or academic or relationship, whatever. Right now, I think that the two concepts or skills that rise to the top are, as you said, about goals, right? So valued living and figuring out values. What are your 5 to 7 core values, and how can you, A, determine those values, B, define them for you? Like, what does courage mean for Mike? What does integrity mean for John? Not the textbook definition, but what does it look like for me to live and with integrity, with courage, with kindness? And then figure out what behaviors align with those, and what intentional behaviors can I do on a day-to-day basis to move myself in that direction. Right. So I think that's a lot. That's not all done in 10 minutes. That's a long process. But I think that's central. And then the other thing is, let's keep, in order to help that process and to get direction from that process, how do we keep our attention in the present moment? So I think a daily mindfulness practice is essential. And, whether that's a mindfulness meditation, mindful walks, wake up tomorrow and mindfully brush your teeth, right? Keep your attention on the act of brushing your teeth. I'm going to my molars now. I'm brushing the top, brushing my tongue, brushing my gums, whatever you're doing, like stay presently active and focused and noticing of the act of brushing your teeth. I almost never did that or do that. You're always thinking about your day and what am I going to have for breakfast? How do I have to get my kid dressed, or is my wife doing it? What are my sessions like today? How busy am I? So I think there's a value in our at least I can speak for myself, my constant search for efficiency often leads to actually less efficiency, because I'm trying to do things so quickly and be so future focused and get things accomplished that I just miss out on what's going on here in the present. So there's a million different guided meditation, mindfulness meditations. I like the app, the Insight Timer. Provides a way to just do a timer you can choose some ambient noises, a little crackling fire, a brook, some rain. You can do guided stuff within all free within that app. But engage in some mindful practice, and in particular outdoors if you can. Take a walk through your neighborhood and just notice things. Notice the things in your 5 senses, as opposed to going down that road of thinking. And then be self-compassionate, because you're going to go down the thinking road. But the point is, can you say, okay, I've got distracted, and then bring your attention back to whatever you're doing. Caveat, don't do that all day long, right? Your brain can't handle it. Your brain has to go on autopilot sometimes, but pick moments throughout the day, 2 or 3 times a day, to spend 5 or 10 minutes engaging in a mindful activity, washing the dishes, brushing your teeth, making your bed, I don't care what. So I think that is a practice that can help. What that does is it slowly starts to make your brain and retrain your brain to be more aware of when it slips out of the present moment. I just had a session with a client who said she watched an hour-long show on TV, and the whole hour went by, and she had no clue what the episode was about. Yeah. And she wasn't on her phone. She was just so absorbed in her head and just kind of internally focused on whatever, that she was mindless to what the activity that she had engaged herself in. So, pick some times, do some guided stuff, but pick some times throughout the day to be mindfully focused, and then pick some behaviors that are value aligned. If you have a value of family, pick up the phone an extra time and call a parent, call your kid, call a friend and a cousin, or whoever, and just check in. So there are deliberate behaviors we can do, I think, on a day-to-day basis that can align us with those values. And every bit of research out there tells us on values that if we live intentionally in accordance with our values, we feel more energetic, more fulfilled, more genuinely happy. And when we don't, we feel fatigued and remorseful and regretful and guilty. So, that I think those two components are essential right now to kind of living in the moment and focusing on what matters in this today.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I'd say, the mindfulness element is so big. And I think that's something that, many people struggle to carve out the time for. And, I would say sort of tongue in cheek, but also sort of seriously, like if you can't carve the time out for something like that now, you're never going to be able to carve the time out for it, because I mean, in theory, hopefully we all have a little extra time in our day.
Yeah. I mean, you've heard me say this, but like the best meditation teacher I ever talked to told me, like, look, man, if you don't have 5 minutes a day to meditate, you should probably do 10.
Yeah, precisely.
So everybody's got 5 minutes.
Right.
And honestly, here's the thing is, like, we think that because we're wasting that 5 minutes, that we're now going to be less effective and less efficient for our day, when in fact, by anchoring us in the present moment and keeping our attention in the present, we're going to do all the things we then are going to do a little more presently focused, a little more task focused, and probably be more efficient and effective throughout the course of that day. So it's not magic, but it's a skill that develops over time.
Yeah, and I do want to point out that we talk in terms of 5 minutes, and you're like, well, what can 5 minutes do? Well, it's like I say with exercise. Ideally, I'd like to see somebody exercise 3 days a week, but one day of exercise is better than no days of exercise. So it's the biggest benefits that you derive from any health or wellness behavior aren't when you go from doing nothing to a whole lot. They're actually derived when you go from doing nothing to just a little bit more. So I would say, for those of you who are like, oh, 5 minutes, these guys got to be joking me, you're going to derive a bigger benefit from going from 0 to 5 minutes than you're going to derive from going from 15 to 20 minutes. Even though it's the same 5 minutes, it's that initial benefit that you achieve by doing it that makes such a difference. So,
and you're also going to derive a lot more benefit from doing 5 minutes every day than doing 20 minutes one day a week or two. Like with meditation and mindfulness, short periods of time, but daily or as often as possible are going to be way more beneficial than trying to go. You're not going to go to the gym and hit the bench press for 12 hours one day and then be like, all right, I'm good for the month.
So you're telling me it's bad for me to do bench press for 12 hours straight? Like, I think I've done that before. No, I'm kidding.
Hey, you're the expert.
Yeah. So mindfulness, I think everyone gets how beneficial that could be. And as you said, there's Insight Timer, there's also Headspace, two great apps that are out there. Really quickly, in a couple of minutes, maybe you can give an idea of some sort of a resource to help better determine values. Because when I think of values, I think, kind of everyone's initial reaction is, well, I know my values. I'm hardworking and I'm loving and I'm caring. So it's not entirely what you're talking about here. You're talking about a much deeper layer of connection with really what's truly profoundly meaningful for you. So how the heck do you get to that point?
Yeah. So ideally, it's like a small group or a one-on-one process with someone who's trained to talk about it. But if you don't have that ability, you can find value banks in terms of like lists of words. And I can send it to you, and you can blast it out. So it's a list of 80 to 100 words, and you go through a couple of steps. The first step is just, hey, what gut reaction? I'm just going to go through the list and I'm going to cross off the ones that just don't seem to resonate as much with me. Mm-hmm. Now, caveat, all these values are good. So Sure. If you cross off honesty or freedom, it doesn't mean you don't believe in those things and you don't do those things. They're just not what's at your core. They're not what drives you on a daily basis. So your first round is just an intuitive, like, cross off the ones that don't seem to resonate. Then it gets a little more complicated. The instructions I give are, look at the set of values that are left, they're not crossed off, and think about, is there a value in there that society, our culture, your family has pushed on you as like, this is a value of the Evans family. This is an American value. Freedom, that better be a value of yours, an American, but not necessarily. So identify those that are kind of societal or family-based values, and then also identify some values that you've used or you've attached or adopted to solve a problem. So a guy goes to the doctor, got high blood pressure, he's had a heart attack, and so he's going to adopt the value of health in order to resolve this issue. I adopted the value of perseverance when I was writing my dissertation. It is not one of my core 7 values, but I definitely had to lean on that value during that period of time. So society, culture, family, cross those off. Used it to solve a problem, cross those off. And then with the remainder, you just have to go through and put a high, medium, and low priority for every single one of them, and just keep doing that list over and over again, only dealing with the high priority ones until you have a list of 5 to 7. And the idea there is it's not some sort of, I'm not trying to punish people by having to get down to 7 values, but first of all, one of the things that creates the most distress in our lives is when we have value conflicts. And if we've got 20 core values, that's just too much conflict for our brain and our ego and our self to handle. So getting ourselves down to about 5 to 7 core values is really what we suggest. As a tip for that, 2 tips that I usually give people are, eventually you can usually play the synonym game with the list that's left. I remember the first time I did this, 4 of my 7 values were relationship, connection, community, partnership, family. And it was okay, I don't need all 5 of these. So, you can play the synonym game by just picking language that makes sense to you. So that's a tip that I would give to kind of whittle those down as well. But great. It is an important process.
That's great. So John, we only have a couple minutes left. So before we finish, why don't you let people know how they can get a hold of you if they have questions? I mean, certainly you're on the Community Over Coronavirus Facebook page, so somebody could just tag you. But if somebody does want to reach out to you directly, how would they do that?
So you can definitely write me a Facebook message from the group. You can also write me an email at johnevans@blendhealth.com. That's JOHNEVANS @BLNDhealth.com. Mm-hmm. Honestly, if you contact Mike, you can give him my phone number. Have somebody text me or write me an email and just say, hey, I'd like to know a little bit more. Check our website, www.blendhealth.com, BLNDHEALTH.com. We do a lot of virtual workshops, ones for medical professionals, college students, high school students. We do one in the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning is kind of a mental check-in. So we've been doing those. Then you can see the kind of list of all those on the website. So there's any way you want to get a hold of me, have a phone conversation, get on Zoom, have an email conversation. More than happy to answer questions and sit down and do a consultation. We do consultations where we can kind of drill into, is this a process that might be worthwhile for you right now? And we start with that.
Awesome. I will post both a link to your website as well as your email in the group, just so if people do want to reach out to you, they have that contact information very readily accessible. Well, John, I mean, this has been great. I think, we've been spending a lot of time in our society the past month and a half or so talking about physical health and pathology and a virus. And what's kind of gone by the wayside here is mental health and mental well-being. And I think that is as critical of an aspect to this entire crisis as the physical component. And so, I mean, I really appreciate you coming on, sharing all these resources. John has put together a little recorded ACT workshop that we're going to post up in the group next week. We're going to get that posted up on Monday. So that'll be up there. And John has some exercises in there, and also make sure I tag John in that post. But if any of you do have questions for John, please reach out directly to him. I mean, we really want to make sure we're taking care of your whole well-being during this process, not just your physical well-being. And we're really blessed and fortunate to have connections with John and his business partner, Brooke, and Blend Health to be able to do this. So I hope everyone out there stays safe and stays healthy. And John, thank you so much for your time. It was great.
Yeah, thanks. And the last thing I'll say is look, if you're feeling anxious, you should feel anxious. Right? You are completely validated in feeling anxious. We just don't have to let it run our day and our life right now.
Amen to that. All right, John. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone else, thank you. And again, remind your friends that this is going to be on our After Hours channel. I think this is such an impactful conversation for people to hear. Share it with your friends, your family, everyone you can, because we all need to hear this information during this difficult time.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. And thanks for having me on.
Yep. Thanks. Everyone take care. Bye, guys. Bye, Mom. I see you're on there, Mom. Bye, Mom.
Oh, bye, Mrs. Stack.